The council chamber on Threshold Station was round, cold, and made of pale blue metal that seemed to glow from within. 12 seats circled a raised platform. 11 of those seats were filled by beings who had flown between stars for thousands of years. The 12th seat, added only 8 months ago, held a single human woman named Ambassador Elena Voss. She sat very still. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her. Around her, the other delegates spoke in calm, measured voices, the kind of voices that belonged to species who had never once doubted their place in the galaxy. "The vote is finished," said the speaker, a tall being from the Thren Assembly, with silver skin and 4 eyes that never seemed to blink. By a count of 10 to 1, the Council rules that the species known as humanity shall not be permitted to construct armed vessels above the classification of local patrol craft. Humanity may build ships for trade, for exploration, and for defense of a single system boundary, using weapons no stronger than point defense arrays, warships, cruisers, dreadnoughts. These remain forbidden. Elena kept her face calm. Inside, something hot and furious was building in her chest. "May I ask why?" she said. The speaker's 4 eyes turned to her, slow and deliberate. "You already know why, Ambassador. Your species has existed among the stars for less than a year. In that year, you have shown remarkable technological growth, faster than any species in recorded history, in fact. That is precisely the problem. A species that grows so quickly, with so little time to learn restraint, is a danger to itself and to others. We have seen young species build warships before. We have seen where that road leads." "You mean the Thren War," Elena said quietly. The speaker did not answer, which was an answer in itself. 600 years ago, before the council had its current shape, a species called the Korvath had been granted the right to build warships shortly after joining galactic society. Within 2 decades, they had turned those ships against 3 of their neighbors. The war had lasted 80 years and had ended only when the Korvath home system was reduced to asteroids. Nobody in the chamber ever said the Korvath's name out loud. It was easier to just say the war and let everyone fill in the rest. "We are not the Korvath," Elena said. "No species ever believes they are," replied a small, insect-like delegate from the Korin hive, its mandibles clicking softly as it spoke. "That is exactly what the Korvath said too." Elena wanted to argue. She wanted to stand up and say that humanity had ended its own last great war 80 years ago, and had not fought another one since, that humans had walked away from nuclear weapons, that humans had sent doctors and food into disaster zones long before humans had sent probes into space. She wanted to say all of it, but she had learned, in 8 months of sitting in this chamber, that facts rarely won arguments here. Fear did the deciding, and these people were afraid of something they did not understand. So instead, she simply said, "The Council's judgment is noted, Ambassador. Humanity will comply with the ruling." The speaker inclined its head, satisfied. The vote moved on to trade tariffs on rare gas mining, a subject Elena barely listened to. 4 light-years away, in the Sol system, a very different kind of meeting was happening. Admiral Marcus Reyes stood in a briefing room deep beneath the Luna shipyards, looking at a hologram of a small, sleek vessel, the Kestrel, humanity's newest and most advanced local patrol craft. It was fast. It had good sensors. Its point defense guns could shred incoming missiles out of the sky. It could not survive 5 seconds against anything the Council called a warship. "That's the ship," said Dr. Priya Anand, the chief engineer standing beside him, arms crossed. "That's what they're letting us have, a glorified Coast Guard cutter." Marcus rubbed his jaw. He had spent 30 years in the old Earth navies before first contact, and another 8 in what was now called the Sol Defense Fleet. He had commanded frigates in the last regional conflict before Earth's nations finally, painfully, agreed to stop shooting at each other. He knew what a real warship looked like, and he knew the Kestrel was not one. "They're not being unreasonable by their own logic," he said slowly. "From where they're sitting, humanity showed up out of nowhere with fusion drives, gravity manipulation, and a working antimatter reactor in under a decade. That scares people who've had 10,000 years to get comfortable." "So the answer is to keep us weak forever?" Priya said. "Marcus, I've seen the deep space telemetry. Something is moving out past the Karsa belt, something big. The scouts that went to check it out, 3 of them never came back. Not damaged, not distress signals. Gone. And the Council's answer to that is to make sure humanity can't build anything bigger than a patrol boat. Marcus said nothing for a long moment. He had seen the same reports. Everyone in Sol Defense Command had seen them, passed hand to hand in secure briefings, never spoken about openly. 3 Thren scout ships, each one armed and armored far beyond anything humanity currently possessed, had vanished near a region of space, the old star charts simply labeled Dead Reach. The Council's official position was that this was an internal matter under investigation. Nobody had explained what could kill a Thren scout ship without leaving a trace. "What are you suggesting?" Marcus finally asked. Priya walked to the console and pulled up a second hologram. It showed rough technical drawings. Nothing finished, nothing polished, just the bones of an idea. A long hull, heavy armor plating, weapon hardpoints along both flanks. "I'm suggesting," she said, "that we build it anyway." Marcus stared at the design for a long time. "That's a direct violation of Council law, Priya. If they find out, they could pull our trade rights. They could quarantine the whole system. They could do a lot worse than that. And if we don't, and that thing out past Karsa Belt decides to come this way, what happens then? We hand them a fleet of patrol boats and a polite letter explaining we tried our best?" Marcus looked at the design again. Then he looked at the small model of an old wet Navy destroyer sitting on the shelf behind Priya's desk, a gift from his daughter when he'd made admiral. He thought about every war he had lived through, every war he had commanded ships in, every peace treaty he had watched get signed with trembling hands after too many people had already died. "We're not going to build a warship to threaten anyone," he said finally. "We build it to survive. That's the only justification I'll accept, and that's the only justification I want written into every plan, every log, every line of code on this project. Understood?" Priya nodded. "Understood. Then let's see how we do this without anyone noticing," Marcus said. "Because the moment the Council finds out, this whole thing ends before it starts." The idea, when it finally took shape, was elegant in its simplicity. Council law did not forbid humanity from building large ships. It forbade humanity from building warships, vessels whose primary design purpose was combat. Nothing in the law said anything about mining vessels, or colony transports, or deep space research platforms, all of which were permitted to be enormous, heavily armored against asteroid impacts and radiation, and equipped with powerful engines for hauling cargo through hostile environments. Nothing in the law said those vessels could not also, coincidentally, be built strong enough to mount weapons later, if the need ever arose. "We call it the Prometheus program," Priya said, 3 weeks later, standing in front of a small team of engineers, naval officers, and one very nervous government liaison from the newly formed Terran Assembly. Officially, it is a fleet of 6 heavy-class mining and salvage vessels, intended to support asteroid belt operations in the outer Sol system. Unofficially, it's the spine of a battle fleet, Marcus finished. The armor plating will be twice what any real mining ship needs. The reactors will be overbuilt by a factor of 4. The internal frame will have hardpoints disguised as maintenance conduits, ready to receive weapon systems the day, if the day, comes when we actually need them. The government liaison, a young man named Tomas Ferreira, looked deeply unhappy. If the Council inspectors do a deep scan of these ships and find weapon hardpoints, "They won't find weapon hardpoints," Priya said. "They'll find empty conduit space rated for high current power transfer, which is completely normal in a mining vessel that uses industrial-grade plasma cutters. It's the same conduit design, the same rating. The only difference is what you plug into it." "That's," Tomas hesitated. "That's technically legal." "That's the point," Marcus said. Tomas ran a hand through his hair. "The Assembly isn't going to like the risk." "The Assembly doesn't have to know all the details," Marcus said. "They asked me to keep Sol systems safe. I intend to do that job." Over the following months, 6 massive hulls began to take shape in orbit above Luna and Mars. From the outside, they looked exactly like what they were supposed to be. Bulky, unglamorous mining ships, the kind of vessel nobody would look at twice. Independent observers from 3 different Council member species toured the shipyards twice during construction, walked through half-finished corridors, checked reactor certifications, and left satisfied that humanity was, once again, behaving itself. What the inspectors did not see was the second set of blueprints, kept off every official network, printed only on paper, locked in a safe in Priya's own office. They did not see the small team of weapons engineers, technically classified as structural systems specialists, running simulations late into the night on railgun designs that could punch through starship armor from 100,000 kilometers away. They did not see Marcus Reyes standing on the observation deck of Shipyard 3 at 2 in the morning, watching the half-built hull of what would eventually be named the Ares, thinking about 3 vanished Thren scout ships, and wondering how much time humanity actually had. Elena Voss did not know about the Prometheus program. Not yet. She spent her days in the council chamber, fighting small battles that never made headlines back home. Trade quotas, travel permits, the constant grinding effort of proving, meeting after meeting, that humanity deserved to be taken seriously. She had grown skilled at reading the other delegates, learning which ones respected humanity's speed and ingenuity, and which ones saw it only as a threat to be managed. One delegate in particular had become, against all odds, something like an ally. His name was Kaelth Dra, representative of the Vantori Concord, a species of tall, thin beings with pale green skin and an unusual sense of dry humor that Elena had come to appreciate. Kaelth had voted against the shipbuilding ban. "You are the only species I have met in 300 years of council service who apologizes for solving problems too quickly," Kaelth told her one evening, over drinks in the station's observation lounge. His species drank something the color of ink. Elena drank tea. Most delegates spend decades arguing about theoretical improvements. Your people simply build the thing and argue about it afterward. It is unsettling. It is also, I confess, a little bit wonderful. "Tell that to the 10 delegates who voted to ban our warships," Elena said. Kaelth's expression shifted, the dry humor fading. "Elena, I want to tell you something, and I want you to listen carefully, because I am risking more than I should by saying it." She set down her tea. "I'm listening." The scout ships that went missing past Karsa Belt were not Thren accidents. I have seen the sensor fragments recovered from the last transmission of the third ship. Something engaged it in combat. Something with weapons technology beyond anything currently fielded by any council member species. Whatever it is, it destroyed a fully armed Thren cruiser scout in under 90 seconds, and it did so from a range our own sensors could barely track. Elena felt cold. Why hasn't the council announced this? Because announcing it means admitting the council's combined fleets might not be able to stop it, Kaelth said quietly. And admitting that means questioning 10,000 years of assumed safety. The council would rather quietly investigate and hope the problem resolves itself than tell 12 worlds their military might be obsolete. And meanwhile, Elena said slowly, they've just told the one species capable of building new things faster than anyone else in the galaxy that it isn't allowed to build warships. Kaelth met her eyes. Yes, I voted against the ban for exactly that reason, though I did not say so publicly. I fear, Ambassador, that the Council has made a mistake it will not recognize until it is too late to fix. Elena sat in silence for a long moment, staring out at the stars beyond the observation window. Somewhere out there, past Karsa Belt, in the region of space-old charts called Dead Reach, something was moving. Something that had already killed 3 ships and left almost no trace. And back home, humanity had just been told to build nothing bigger than a patrol boat. She thought about the report she needed to send to the Terran Assembly that night. She thought about Marcus Reyes, whom she had met only twice but respected deeply. A man who did not waste words and did not scare easily. She thought about what she would say to him. Something is coming, she would write, and we are not ready. Build what you need to build. I will hold the line here as long as I can. But I don't know how long that will be. She did not know, as she wrote those words, that 4 light-years away, in the shadow of the Luna shipyards, the first true keel of a human warship had already been laid. Its name, stenciled quietly onto a support beam, that no inspector would ever think to examine closely, was Ares. And it was only the first of 6. Back on Earth, far below the shipyards and the council chambers, and the careful politics of Threshold Station, life went on in the way it always had. Children went to school. Farmers planted crops. News networks argued about sports scores and local elections, mostly unaware that anything unusual was happening in the sky above them. Only a small number of people knew about Varen's rest, about the missing Thren scouts, about the quiet, careful work happening in the shipyards above Luna and Mars. The Terran Assembly had decided, after long debate, that the full truth would cause more panic than it prevented, at least until there was something concrete to tell people. Marcus Reyes disagreed with that choice more than he let on, but he understood the reasoning. Panic did not build ships faster. It only made people afraid of things they could not change. Still, some people noticed. A dock worker at Shipyard 3, loading supply crates onto a transport, once asked Sanjay Okoro why a mining ship needed so much redundant power routing in its lower decks. Sanjay had shrugged and said something about safety margins for deep space operations, and the dock worker had accepted the answer without much thought. Most people did. Most people had no reason to imagine that 6 ordinary-looking cargo vessels might be something else entirely. Marcus thought about that a lot, in the quiet hours after his shifts ended. He thought about the weight of the secret he was carrying, and the weight of the decision he had made to carry it. He had spent his whole career believing that honesty between allies mattered, that trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. And yet here he was, building 6 warships behind the back of the very council that had just admitted humanity into galactic society. He justified it to himself the same way, every night. We are not building these to threaten anyone. We are building them because something out there has already killed without warning, and the people meant to protect us have chosen silence instead of preparation. It did not make the guilt disappear entirely, but it let him sleep, most nights, even if only for a few hours at a time. 3 weeks after the Council's ruling, Elena Voss returned to Earth for the first time since taking her seat as ambassador. It was meant to be a short visit, a series of briefings with the Terran Assembly, a public address reassuring the population that relations with the Council remained stable, and then back to Threshold Station within the week. She used part of that time to visit Marcus in person, flying up to Luna shipyards under the cover of a routine infrastructure inspection, a phrase vague enough that nobody outside Sol Defense Command thought to question it. Standing on the observation deck, looking out at the massive, half-finished hull of the Ares for the first time with her own eyes, rather than through a hologram, Elena felt a strange mixture of pride and fear settle into her chest. "It's bigger than I imagined," she said quietly. "It has to be," Marcus said. "Big enough to survive a hit from something that can kill a Thren cruiser scout without leaving wreckage behind." Elena was quiet for a long moment, watching engineers in work suits crawl across the distant hull like fireflies against the dark. "Do you ever wonder if we're making a mistake, building this in secret, hoping we never have to explain it?" Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. "Every day," he admitted, "but then I think about Varen's rest. I think about what happens if that thing out past Karsa Belt decides Sol System looks interesting one day, and all we have to greet it with is a fleet of glorified Coast Guard boats, and then the doubt goes away pretty quickly." Elena nodded slowly. "The Council doesn't know yet, but some of them suspect. Kael'th Droffer, at least. He hasn't said anything directly, but he's smart enough to read between the lines of shipyard activity reports. Do you trust him?" "As much as I trust anyone up there," Elena said. "Which isn't nothing. He voted against the ban in the first place. I think, if it came down to it, he'd rather see us succeed quietly than get punished publicly." Marcus looked out at the Ares one more time. "Let's hope we never have to find out." They stood together in silence for a while, 2 people carrying very different burdens toward the same uncertain future, watching the slow, patient work of shipbuilders far below, unaware that the clock on their secret was already beginning to run out. 6 months passed, and the mining ships grew. From the observation windows of Luna shipyards, they looked like slow, patient giants. Long gray hulls, 3 kilometers each, bristling with cranes and cargo arms, and the blunt, ugly fixtures of industrial machinery. Anyone watching from a distance would have seen exactly what they were meant to see: humanity building the tools it needed to dig metal and ice out of the asteroid belt. Nobody watching from a distance could see what was happening inside. Deep within the hull of the Ares, in a section of the ship marked on all official documents as Auxiliary Cargo Processing, a team of 40 engineers worked in 3 shifts, around the clock, installing systems that had never been described in any file submitted to the Council. Railgun mounts, disguised as ore-crushing machinery. Shield generators, listed as radiation dampeners for deep space mining operations. A targeting computer, with more processing power than the rest of the ship combined, quietly labeled as a geological survey array. Priya Anand walked the length of the primary weapons bay one evening, her boots echoing on the deck plating, and allowed herself, for just a moment, to feel something like pride. "Talk to me," she said into her comm, and the voice of lead engineer Sanjay Okoro answered from the far end of the bay. Railgun Mount 7 just passed calibration. That's 4 of 6 online. Power draw is within projected limits. The reactor's barely breaking a sweat even at full simulated discharge. And if a Council inspector runs a deep scan on that mount, they'll see an ore crusher motor housing, Sanjay said, because that's exactly what it looks like from the outside, right down to the vibration signature. We copied the design from a real asteroid mining rig, then hollowed it out and rebuilt the inside. It'll pass any scan short of someone physically cutting the housing open. Good, Priya said. Keep it that way. She continued her walk, passing rows of engineers bent over consoles, wires, and half-assembled machinery. Most of them were young, barely out of university, some of them former military, most of them simply brilliant people who had grown up watching humanity's first tentative steps into the stars and wanted, badly, to be part of what came next. None of them had signed up to build a warship. All of them, when Marcus Reyes had explained what the Prometheus program really was and what it was truly for, had chosen to stay anyway. That mattered to Priya more than she let herself say out loud. 3 light-years away, near the edge of Council space, a small trading outpost called Varen's Rest orbited a dim red star. It was not an important place. It had a population of perhaps 4,000 beings from a dozen species, a handful of docking bays, and a reputation for selling supplies to independent traders who didn't want to deal with the paperwork of a major Council port. It had no defenses to speak of, beyond a handful of aging point defense turrets that hadn't been fired in anger in over a century. The attack came without warning. There was no hail, no demand, no declaration. Sensor logs recovered later showed a cluster of unidentified contacts emerging from what the analysts would eventually call a stealth drop, vessels that had somehow approached to within firing range without being detected by any of the outpost's sensor arrays, an achievement that should have been technologically impossible by every standard Council science understood. The attack lasted 6 minutes. When a Thren patrol frigate arrived 4 hours later, responding to a distress beacon that had barely managed to transmit before going silent, there was nothing left to save. Varen's Rest was a field of debris, slowly cooling, spinning through the dark. 4,000 lives, gone. No survivors, no wreckage from the attacking ships, no trace of who, or what, had done it, beyond a strange residue on some of the debris that Thren scientists would spend the next several weeks failing to fully identify. The news reached the Council chamber 2 days later, and this time, it could not be quietly filed away. Elena Voss stood in the chamber and watched the speaker's 4 eyes blink, slowly, for what she suspected was the first time she had ever seen it happen. 4,000 dead, the speaker said, and for once, the calm, measured voice cracked slightly at the edges. An entire outpost, erased in 6 minutes, by an enemy no sensor detected until it was already firing. The chamber was not calm today. Delegates spoke over one another, voices rising, the usual formal procedures collapsing into something closer to panic, carefully wearing the mask of diplomacy. Elena sat quietly, watching, waiting for her moment. It came when the Chorin Hive delegate, the small insect-like being who had compared Elena's people to the long-dead Korvath, turned toward her with clicking mandibles and asked, in a voice sharp with fear, "Ambassador Voss, your species claims remarkable technological speed. Have your scientists detected anything regarding the nature of this attack? Any insight at all?" Elena rose slowly to her feet. She could feel Kael'th Drya watching her from across the chamber, his pale green face unreadable. "I have no direct data on the attack at Varen's Rest," she said carefully. "But I do know this. 3 Thren scout vessels went missing near Deadreach 8 months ago. The Council did not disclose that to its member species at the time. If the Council had shared that information, perhaps Varen's Rest would have requested additional defenses. Perhaps 4,000 people would still be alive. The chamber went silent. The speaker's 4 eyes fixed on her. That information was under active investigation. That information, Elena said, her voice steady but hard, should have been shared with every system on the frontier the moment it was confirmed that 3 armed warships vanished without a trace. Instead, the Council chose secrecy, and 8 months later, an outpost with no meaningful defenses was wiped from existence by the same unknown enemy. I would ask the Council, respectfully, to consider whether its policy of managing fear through silence has cost more lives than honesty would have. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Kael'th Dra rose from his seat. Ambassador Voss raises a fair point, he said. I would further ask the Council to reconsider its recent ruling restricting humanity's shipbuilding rights. If an enemy capable of destroying a Thren scout vessel and annihilating an entire outpost is operating near our frontier, perhaps this is not the moment to be limiting any member species' ability to defend itself. The speaker's expression tightened. The ruling stands. Humanity's rapid growth remains a separate concern from the current crisis, and conflating the two serves no one. Elena wanted to scream. Instead, she simply said, "Noted," and sat back down, her hands folded tightly in her lap to keep them from shaking. The report reached Marcus Reyes 40 minutes after it reached the Council chamber, routed through Elena's private channel, marked with the highest priority flag humanity's diplomatic corps possessed. He read it twice, standing alone in his office at Seoul Defense Command, the lights dimmed, the hum of the station around him the only sound. 4,000 dead, no warning, no trace of the enemy. The Council still refuses to lift the ban. He sat down heavily in his chair and stared at the wall for a long time. Then he opened a secure channel to Priya Anand. I saw it, she said, before he could speak. Her voice was tight. Varen's Rest, God, Marcus, 4,000 people. How close are we? He asked. The Ares is 80% complete. Railguns are installed and calibrated. Shields are online, though we haven't been able to stress test them at full power without risking detection. The other 5 hulls are between 40 and 60%. Timeline to full combat readiness on the Ares alone? Priya was quiet for a moment. If we push hard, cut some non-essential systems, run triple shifts, accept some risk on quality control, 6 weeks, maybe 5, if we get lucky. Push hard, Marcus said. I want the Ares combat ready in 5 weeks. Marcus, if we push that hard, the Council inspectors scheduled for next month's routine check are going to see a ship that looks a lot less like a mining vessel and a lot more like. I know what it's going to look like, Marcus said, but I'd rather explain a suspicious inspection than explain why Sol System had no defense when something that erased 4,000 people at Varen's Rest decided to come knocking. We are out of time to be careful, Priya. Push hard. There was a long silence on the line. Understood, Priya said finally. I'll get it done. 5 weeks became the hardest stretch of Priya Anand's life. She barely slept. She ate meals standing up in front of holographic schematics, correcting errors, approving modifications, catching problems before they became disasters. Sanjay Okoro and his team worked 18-hour shifts without complaint, driven by the same quiet, grim understanding that had settled over the entire project since the news of Varen's Rest. This was no longer a hypothetical defense against a hypothetical threat. This was a race against something that had already proven it could kill without warning and vanish without a trace. 3 weeks into the push, disaster nearly struck. A junior engineer, exhausted and careless after a 16-hour shift, mislabeled a maintenance request for the railgun mounts, accidentally routing it through the standard civilian shipyard system instead of the secure Prometheus channel. For 6 hours, the request sat in a queue that any Council liaison officer stationed at Luna could theoretically access. Priya found the error at 2 in the morning, her heart nearly stopping when she saw it. She spent the next hour manually purging the request and replacing it with a sanitized version, describing routine maintenance on ore processing equipment, praying the entire time that no one had already seen the original. No one had. But it was close enough that Priya didn't sleep again that night, lying awake instead, running through every possible way the entire program could unravel. We need better internal security, she told Marcus the next morning, her voice raw with exhaustion. One mistake like that, at the wrong time, and it's over. The council pulls our trade rights, maybe worse. We can't afford another close call. Marcus nodded grimly. Agreed. I'm bringing in a dedicated security team, people who've worked classified projects before. And I'm restricting Prometheus documentation to a need-to-know list. It's going to slow us down slightly, but it's necessary. Slower is fine, Priya said. Discovered is not. By the end of the 5th week, the Ares floated in high orbit above Luna, its railguns silent, its shields dormant, its true nature hidden beneath layers of camouflage and careful paperwork. To any outside observer, it remained exactly what its registration claimed, a heavy-class asteroid mining vessel, nearly ready for its first deployment to the outer belt. Marcus stood on the observation deck of Shipyard 3, looking out at the massive gray hull silhouetted against the stars, and felt something settle in his chest that was not quite relief and not quite fear, but some uneasy mixture of both. 5 more ships were still under construction. Somewhere past Karsa Belt, in the region of space old charts called Dead Reach, something had already killed 3 Thren scout vessels and annihilated an entire outpost in 6 minutes. And humanity, told by the most powerful alliance of civilizations in the known galaxy that it was not permitted to build a warship, had just quietly finished its first one. Marcus keyed his comm. Priya, status on weapons testing? Ready whenever you give the order, she said. Somewhere far enough from prying eyes that nobody will ask questions. Marcus looked out at the stars one more time, thinking of Varen's Rest, thinking of 4,000 people who had never gotten a warning, thinking of Elena Voss, standing alone in a council chamber, fighting battles with words while he fought them with steel. Set it up, he said. Let's find out what the Ares can do. While the Ares neared the end of its construction, life on the frontier grew steadily more tense. Word of Varen's Rest had spread across council space in the way that terrible news always does, slowly at first, then all at once, until every outpost, every trading station, every frontier colony, was talking about the outpost that had vanished in 6 minutes. Governments that had never bothered with more than symbolic defenses began quietly requesting additional patrol ships. Insurance rates for frontier trade routes tripled almost overnight. A quiet, creeping fear settled over the edges of council territory, the kind of fear that comes from knowing a monster is out there somewhere, without knowing exactly where or when it might return. On Threshold Station, the mood in the council chamber shifted along with it. Meetings that had once dragged on for hours over minor trade disputes now moved briskly, delegates eager to discuss defense budgets and border security instead. Elena noticed the change immediately and used it to her advantage wherever she could, gently reminding delegates in private conversations that humanity's shipbuilding restrictions had been imposed during a calmer, more confident time, a time that increasingly felt like it belonged to a different galaxy altogether. Kael'thra proved to be an unexpectedly valuable source of information during this period, through channels Elena never fully understood and never asked too many questions about. He kept her informed of shifting opinions among the delegates, warning her which arguments were gaining traction and which were falling flat. The Choran delegate remains your strongest opposition, he told her one evening, as they walked together along the station's long observation promenade. It genuinely believes, I think, that history will repeat itself if humanity is allowed to build freely. It is not acting out of malice, it is acting out of fear, and fear does not respond well to logic. Then how do we change its mind? Elena asked. Perhaps we cannot, Kael'th said. Perhaps the only thing that will change its mind is time, and evidence, and the slow accumulation of trust. Or perhaps, he added, glancing at her sideways, circumstances will simply move faster than the Choran delegate's fear can keep up with. Elena did not answer that directly. She had a strong suspicion Kael'th already knew more about Seoul Defense Command's shipyard activity than he was letting on, and she had learned, over the months, that it was often better not to confirm things out loud, even to an ally. Back in Sol System, the final weeks before the Ares' weapons test were marked by a strange, quiet tension that settled over everyone involved in the Prometheus program. Priya Anand found herself sleeping less and less, running simulation after simulation on the railgun systems, checking and rechecking every calculation, terrified of the possibility that some small error might cause a catastrophic failure the first time the weapons actually fired. Captain Lena Ortiz spent the same weeks drilling her skeleton crew relentlessly, running through emergency procedures again and again until the responses became instinct rather than memory. Most of her crew were young, some barely out of flight academy, others reassigned from cargo and patrol duty, with only a vague understanding of what they had actually volunteered for. Ortiz made sure, by the end of those weeks, that every single one of them understood exactly what the Ares was, and exactly what might be asked of them if the day ever came to use it in true combat. "This isn't a mining ship," she told them, standing in the ship's cramped briefing room 3 days before the weapons test. "I know that's what the paperwork says. I know that's what we've told anyone who asked. But I want every person in this room to understand what you're actually serving on, because if the day comes when we have to use this ship the way it was really built to be used, I need you ready, not confused." Nobody in the room spoke. A young ensign named Maria Delgado, barely 6 months out of flight academy, finally raised her hand. "Captain, why us? Why not send the truth to the whole fleet? Get more experienced crews assigned?" Ortiz considered the question carefully before answering. Because the Admiral needed people who could keep a secret, who could work hard without asking too many questions, and who believed in why we were doing this, even when it would have been easier to walk away. That's you, all of you. I wouldn't trade this crew for anyone else in the fleet. The room was silent for a long moment, and then, slowly, something like resolve settled over the young faces gathered there. It was not confidence, exactly. None of them had ever been in real combat, and all of them understood what that uncertainty meant. But it was determination, and in Ortiz's experience, determination was often worth more than confidence when the moment finally came. The testing site was a quiet patch of space beyond the orbit of Neptune, far from shipping lanes, far from council listening posts, far from anywhere a curious sensor sweep might catch something it shouldn't. The Ares drifted there alone, its running lights dimmed, its outer hull still showing the scuffed, workmanlike gray of a mining vessel. Inside, the mood was different from anything the crew had felt during construction. This was no longer theory. This was no longer blueprints and simulations. Today, for the first time, the Ares was going to fire its weapons for real. Marcus Reyes stood on the bridge, a space that had been quietly reconfigured over the past 2 months from a civilian cargo command deck into something closer to a true warship's command center. Captain Lena Ortiz sat in the command chair, a veteran of the old Pacific Fleet before first contact, chosen personally by Marcus for her steady hands and steadier judgment. "Target drone is in position," Ortiz reported. 50,000 kilometers out, matching the estimated hull toughness of a Thren cruiser scout, based on the specs we could piece together. "Railgun 1, ready," said the weapons officer, a young man named David Kwan who had, until 8 months ago, believed his career would consist entirely of calibrating mining lasers. "Fire," Ortiz said. The Ares shuddered, a deep, powerful vibration running through the deck plating as the railgun discharged. On the main display, a streak of light crossed the black in less than a second, and 50,000 kilometers away, the target drone simply ceased to exist, turned in an instant into an expanding cloud of glowing debris. Nobody on the bridge spoke for a moment. "Sensor readout," Marcus said quietly. "Impact velocity was 0.23 the speed of light," Kwan said, his voice unsteady with something between awe and disbelief. "Energy transfer on impact was, sir, that's nearly 4 times the estimated output of a standard Thren cruiser scout's main weapon." Priya, watching from a secondary console near the back of the bridge, allowed herself a small, tired smile. Months of exhaustion, of stolen sleep, of terror at every close call with council inspectors, all of it had led to this single, silent moment where a piece of metal in disguise had just proven it could kill anything the council currently possessed. "Run the shield test," Marcus said. The second test was quieter, less dramatic to watch, but in some ways more important. The Ares activated its shield generators, disguised in official records as radiation-dampening fields, and a drone armed with a simulated Thren-grade weapon fired directly at the ship's hull. The energy bolt struck the shimmering barrier and dispersed harmlessly, the Ares not even shifting in its orbit. Shields held at 11% capacity used, Priya reported, reading the data. We could take that hit 40 more times before the generators even started to strain. Marcus exhaled slowly, a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for months. Send the data to Seoul Defense Command, he said. Encrypted, off the Council networks entirely, and send a copy to Ambassador Voss. She needs to know what we've built, and she needs to know it exists before anyone else finds out the hard way. Elena received the data package late at night, alone in her quarters aboard Threshold Station. She opened it expecting technical specifications she wouldn't fully understand. Instead, she found a short message from Marcus Reyes at the top of the file. Elena, what you're about to see doesn't exist, officially. It's called the Ares. It's the first of 6. We built it because we didn't think we had a choice, not after Varen's rest. I know this puts you in an impossible position. You've spent 8 months telling the Council we would comply with their ruling, and now I'm telling you we didn't. I'm sorry for that, but I need you to know the truth, because I think you're going to need it soon. Something is coming, and when it gets here, I don't want humanity facing it with nothing but patrol boats. Marcus. Elena read the message 3 times. Then she opened the attached files and watched, in silence, as a streak of light crossed 50,000 kilometers of empty space and turned a target drone into gas and debris in less than a second. She sat back in her chair, her heart pounding. Part of her, the part that had spent 8 months building trust with delegates like Kael'th Dra, carefully proving humanity could be honest, could be reliable, could be trusted, was furious. Marcus had lied to the Council. He had lied to her, in a sense, by omission, for months. If this was discovered, it could undo everything she had worked to build. It could paint humanity exactly as the Council's worst fears predicted. A species that agreed to rules in public and broke them in private the moment nobody was watching. But another part of her, the part that had stood in that chamber and listened to the speaker's voice crack while describing 4,000 deaths at Varen's rest, felt something closer to relief. She thought about the message Kael'th had sent her weeks ago. Something engaged it in combat. Something with weapons technology beyond anything currently fielded by any Council member species. She thought about the ban, imposed not because humanity had done anything wrong, but because humanity had done everything too well, too fast, and frightened people who measured progress in centuries instead of years. She closed the file and sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about what she would do next. The Council did not remain in the dark about the threat for much longer. 3 weeks after Varen's rest, a Council border fleet, 6 Thren cruisers and 2 Vantori escort vessels, the largest deployment sent to investigate Dead Reach since the crisis began, made contact with the enemy directly for the first time. The engagement lasted 11 minutes. Sensor telemetry, recovered from the single surviving Vantori escort that managed to retreat, painted a picture that sent a wave of controlled panic through every Council government simultaneously. The enemy fleet consisted of perhaps a dozen vessels, none larger than a standard Thren cruiser, all sharing a strange, organic-looking hull design that seemed to absorb sensor pulses rather than reflect them, making accurate targeting almost impossible. They fought with a speed and precision that the Thren commander, in his last transmission before his ship went silent, described as inhuman coordination, as if piloted by a single mind split across many vessels. 5 of the 6 Thren cruisers were destroyed. Both Vantori escorts were crippled, one of which managed to limp back to friendly space with barely a third of its crew alive. The enemy fleet suffered no confirmed losses. The name the Council began using for the enemy, borrowed from an old Thren myth about a swarm intelligence that consumed entire worlds, was the Val Sethi. Nobody knew if it was accurate, nobody knew much of anything, except that the Val Sethi were real, they were dangerous, and they were slowly, steadily expanding outward from Dead Reach toward the settled heart of Council space. The emergency session was the largest gathering the Council chamber had held in decades. Every delegate species sent not just their primary ambassador but secondary advisors, military liaisons and, in a break from all normal protocol, several senior fleet commanders, summoned directly from active postings to stand at the edges of the chamber and answer questions in real time. Elena stood among them, watching the speaker address the full assembly. its four eyes tired in a way she had never seen before. "The border fleet sent to investigate Dead Reach has been destroyed," the speaker said, without preamble. 5 Thren cruisers, 2 Vantori escorts. The enemy, designated Val Sethi, pending further intelligence, is advancing. Current projections estimate their forces could reach the outer settled systems within 4 to 6 months if the advance continues at its current pace. The chamber erupted. Elena had never seen anything like it, delegates shouting over one another, some demanding immediate mass mobilization, others arguing for diplomatic contact with the Val Sethi, despite having no evidence they were capable of communication. Still others simply frozen, staring at the display of destroyed ships with expressions of pure shock. The speaker raised a hand and slowly the chamber quieted. The Council Fleet Command estimates that stopping a Val Sethi advance of this scale will require the combined military strength of every member species, operating in full coordination, for the first time in Council history. Kael'th Dra rose to speak. "Then I would ask, formally, that the Council reconsider its restriction on humanity's shipbuilding rights. If we require every possible resource, it seems foolish to keep one member species deliberately weak." The Choran Hive delegate, the same one who had spoken of the Korvath months earlier, rose as well, mandibles clicking rapidly. "I understand the logic, but I would remind the Council, we do not know humanity's true capabilities. Lifting the ban now, in a moment of crisis, risks creating exactly the kind of unchecked growth we originally sought to prevent. We could be trading one existential threat for another." Elena felt her pulse quicken. This was the moment. She could feel it. She rose to her feet before she had fully decided to speak. "With respect," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber, "the Council's fear of humanity's growth has already cost this galaxy critical time. I would ask every delegate here to consider a simple question. Which is the greater risk? A species that builds quickly, and has, in its entire recorded history since first contact, never once used that speed to threaten another Council member, or an enemy that has already destroyed a combined Council fleet in 11 minutes and shows no sign of slowing down?" The chamber was silent. "I would also remind the Council," Elena continued, her heart pounding, "that humanity does not require the Council's permission to defend itself. We have complied with your ruling for 8 months, out of respect for this body and the trust we hope to build with it. But if the Val Sethi reach Sol system, we will defend our home, with or without your approval. I would simply ask that the Council decide, now, whether it wants humanity's strength as an ally in the fight ahead, or whether it wants to discover that strength as a surprise, alone, at the worst possible moment." She sat down. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. The speaker's 4 eyes studied her carefully. That sounded, Ambassador Voss, like a species that has already decided to build more than patrol boats. Elena did not answer. She did not need to. Somewhere, 4 light-years away, 5 more hulls were nearing completion in the shipyards above Luna and Mars, and the Ares sat quietly in high orbit, its weapons tested, its shields proven, waiting. The speaker studied her for a long moment more, then turned back to address the full chamber, its voice heavy with the weight of a decision it was clearly not ready to make. "This session is suspended," it said. "The Council will reconvene in 72 hours to vote on humanity's shipbuilding status, in light of the current crisis. Until then, all member species are instructed to prepare their fleets for potential full mobilization." The chamber began to empty, delegates murmuring among themselves, fear and uncertainty hanging in the air like static before a storm. Elena remained in her seat a moment longer, staring at the space where the speaker had stood, thinking about the message from Marcus still open on her private terminal, thinking about a streak of light crossing 50,000 kilometers of empty space in less than a second. 72 hours, she thought. I hope that's enough time. I hope any of this is enough time. The days between the destruction of the border fleet and the emergency vote were, for Marcus Reyes, some of the strangest of his career. News of the disaster reached Sol System through official council channels within hours, and this time, there was no keeping it quiet. The Terran Assembly convened an emergency session of its own, and for the first time, the full truth about the Prometheus program was laid out before the elected representatives of Earth's governments. 6 ships, built in secret over the better part of a year, disguised as mining vessels, one of them already combat-tested and proven. The reaction was not what Marcus had expected. He had braced himself for outrage, for accusations of overreach, for demands that the program be shut down immediately before it could cause a diplomatic disaster. Instead, after the initial shock wore off, the Assembly's questions turned quickly to practical matters. How many ships could be finished in time? What resources were needed? Whether additional funding could accelerate construction on the remaining 4 hulls. "You lied to us for the better part of a year," said one representative, an older woman from what had once been the European Union, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "You built warships without informing the body meant to oversee Seoul Defense Command's activities." "I did," Marcus said simply. He had decided, weeks ago, that if this moment ever came, he would not make excuses. "I made that decision because I believed the risk of moving slowly was greater than the risk of moving without full transparency. I stand by that decision, and I will accept whatever consequences this assembly decides are appropriate. But I would ask that any punishment wait until the current crisis has passed, because right now, Seoul System needs every ship we can put into space." The representative studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "We will discuss consequences later, Admiral. For now, what do you need from us?" It was, Marcus reflected afterward, as close to forgiveness as he was likely to get, and it was more than he had expected. The final push to prepare the fleet consumed every waking hour of the following weeks. The Athena, second of the 6 hulls, had been nearing completion even before the Council's emergency vote, and with the full resources of the Terran Assembly now openly behind the Prometheus program, its timeline accelerated dramatically. Engineers who had once worked in careful secrecy, hiding their true purpose behind false documentation, now worked in the open, coordinating freely with Council observers who arrived to inspect humanity's sudden, remarkable claim of 6 operational warships. Priya Anand found the transition strange and, in some ways, harder than the secrecy had been. For months, she had grown used to the careful, constant vigilance required to hide the true nature of the Prometheus program. Now, with everything exposed, she found herself explaining railgun specifications to Thren engineers, who studied her work with a mixture of professional respect and undisguised astonishment, several of them openly admitting that Council shipbuilding techniques had not advanced significantly in centuries, content to rely on designs that had worked well enough for generations. "You have achieved in less than a year what our engineering corps has not meaningfully improved upon in 300 years, one Thren engineer told her during a joint inspection of the Athena's weapons systems. "I confess, Dr. Anand, I do not know whether to be impressed or unsettled." "Both, probably," Priya said. "That seems to be the general reaction." Kael'thdrafa visited the shipyards personally during this period, at Elena's invitation, curious to see firsthand the vessels he had quietly suspected existed for months. He walked the length of the Ares's primary weapons bay in silence, studying the railgun mounts, the shield generators, the careful, efficient design that had turned a disguised mining ship into something capable of matching, and in some ways exceeding, the best the Council had to offer. "I voted against the ban because I believed humanity deserved the chance to prove itself trustworthy," he told Marcus, as they stood together on the observation deck. "I did not expect the proof to arrive quite this dramatically." Marcus allowed himself a small, tired smile. "Neither did we, honestly. We just didn't see another option." "That," Kael'th said quietly, "may be the truest thing anyone has said to me since this crisis began." The 72 hours before the vote were the longest of Elena Voss's life. She spent them moving between private meetings, corridor conversations, and quiet, careful negotiations with delegates who, for the first time since humanity had joined the Council, seemed genuinely willing to listen. Fear had done what 8 months of diplomacy alone could not. It had made the Council desperate enough to consider options it would never have entertained in calmer times. Kael'thdrafa met her in the observation lounge on the second night, his pale green face drawn and tired. "The vote is close," he told her, without preamble. "Closer than I expected. The Chorin Hive delegate has been quietly lobbying against lifting the ban, arguing that humanity's forces, even if permitted now, could not be built and deployed quickly enough to matter, and that the greater risk lies in setting a precedent that fear alone can overturn council law. Elena's stomach tightened. And what do you think? Kael'th was quiet for a long moment. I think, he said slowly, that the Choran delegate does not know what I know. I have not shared the intelligence reports Thren Command quietly passed to me. Reports suggesting humanity's private communications with your homeworld have shown unusually high shipyard activity at Luna and Mars in recent months, far higher than would be expected for the modest fleet your government has publicly declared. Elena's blood went cold. Kael'th, I have not shared it, he repeated, meeting her eyes. And I do not intend to, unless you ask me not to say that. But I want you to understand, Ambassador, that I am not a fool, and neither are several others on this council. Some of us have simply chosen to look the other way, because we suspect, we hope, that what your people have built quietly might be exactly what this galaxy needs right now. Elena said nothing for a long moment, weighing every possible response, every possible risk. If the vote fails, she said finally, what happens? Then humanity remains restricted to local patrol craft, Kael'th said. And if the Val Sethi reach Sol system regardless, your people will have to decide whether council law matters more than survival. I suspect I already know which one your Admiral Reyes would choose. Elena managed a tired, humorless smile. You have no idea. The vote came 72 hours later, in a chamber packed tighter than Elena had ever seen it. Every delegate species had sent every available representative. The air itself seemed to hum with tension. The speaker stood at the center platform, 4 eyes moving slowly across the assembled council. Before this vote proceeds, it said, the council has received urgent intelligence that must be shared. 3 hours ago, long-range sensor arrays detected a Vihal Sethi fleet, numbering approximately 40 vessels, moving on a trajectory that will bring them into contact with the outer settled systems within 11 days. This is significantly faster than previous projections. Among the systems in the projected path is a cluster of independent trade worlds and, the speaker paused, and for the first time, its measured voice carried something unmistakably close to alarm, the outer edge of Sol system itself. The chamber went utterly silent. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. 11 days. The vote will proceed immediately, the speaker said. All member species are reminded that the outcome of this decision will directly affect the defense capability available to face this threat. The vote took 11 minutes. Elena spent every second of it with her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her nails left marks in her palms. When the final tally displayed above the chamber, it read, 8 in favor, 3 opposed. The ban was lifted. The speaker's voice was heavy, as it spoke the ruling aloud. Humanity's restriction on warship construction is rescinded, effective immediately, in light of the current crisis. The Council further requests, not orders but requests, that humanity's fleet, whatever its current state, be made available to coordinate with Council forces in the defense of threatened systems. Elena rose to her feet, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Speaker," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "I have a message to relay to this council, on behalf of Sol Defense Command. I received it 3 days ago, and was instructed to share it only once this vote concluded." The chamber's attention turned to her, fully. Humanity's fleet, Elena said, is not hypothetical. It is not a plan on paper. As of this morning, Sol Defense Command reports 1 fully operational warship, combat-tested, currently on standby in high orbit above Luna. 5 additional vessels are in final stages of completion, with the second expected to reach combat readiness within 72 hours. The chamber erupted into stunned murmuring. The Choran Hive delegate's mandibles clicked rapidly, its small body practically vibrating with shock. "You had already begun construction, before this vote concluded?" "Yes," Elena said simply, meeting the delegate's many-faceted eyes without flinching. "We built it because 3 Thren scout ships vanished without explanation, and the Council chose silence over honesty. We built it because 4,000 people died at Varen's Rest with no warning and no defenses. We built it because we could not, in good conscience, wait for permission to protect our home and our neighbors from a threat that does not wait for anyone's approval before it attacks." She paused, letting the silence stretch, then continued more quietly. I understand this may be seen as a violation of trust. I am prepared to accept whatever consequences the Council deems appropriate for that violation, after this crisis has passed. But right now, with a Val Sethi fleet 11 days from Sol System, I believe this Council has a choice to make. Continue debating the manner in which humanity's ship came to exist, or accept the help it can offer in the fight ahead. The speaker studied her for a long, silent moment. Then, slowly, its 4 eyes closed briefly, and when it spoke, its voice had lost some of its formal coldness. The Council accepts humanity's offer of assistance, Ambassador Voss, it said. The matter of the early construction will be addressed once the immediate threat has passed. For now, we have 11 days to prepare a defense, and considerably less military strength available than we had hoped. Every resource matters. The message reached Marcus Reyes 40 minutes later, and he read it standing in the same office where he had first read the report of Varen's Rest, months ago. The ban is lifted. The Council knows about the Ares. They're asking for our help. 11 days, Marcus. That's all we have. Elena. He closed his eyes for a long moment, feeling the weight of everything that had led to this. The secret meetings, the sleepless months, the terror of every close call, the exhaustion in Priya's voice every time she reported another milestone reached. All of it had been building toward this single, impossible deadline. He opened a channel to the Ares, currently in high orbit, and to the shipyards where 5 more hulls waited in various stages of completion. This is Admiral Reyes, all Prometheus program personnel, he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. The ban has been lifted. The Council knows what we built, and they're asking for it. A Val Sethi fleet is 11 days from Sol System. I need the Ares combat ready for deployment within 48 hours. I need the Athena, the second hull, nearly complete, combat ready within 5 days. The remaining 4 ships, I need whatever you can give me, even if it's partial weapon systems and skeleton crews. This is no longer a secret project. This is the defense of our home. He paused, looking out at the stars through his office window, thinking of Elena standing alone in that chamber, thinking of the streak of light that had turned a target drone to dust in less than a second, thinking of 4,000 people at Varen's Rest who never got a warning. We built these ships because we refused to be defenseless, he said. Now it's time to find out if we built them well enough. Reyes out. The next 11 days passed in a blur of controlled chaos. The Ares underwent final preparations under the full, open scrutiny of both human and Council observers for the first time. No more hiding, no more disguises, no more careful paperwork designed to fool inspectors. Priya Anand stood on its bridge alongside Captain Ortiz, watching real-time data feeds from 3 different Council species engineering teams, all of them studying humanity's warship with a mixture of professional curiosity and something that looked uncomfortably close to awe. Your railgun design, said a Thren engineer, examining the readouts with obvious fascination, achieves nearly the same output as our capital ship weapons, in a housing a fraction of the size and mass. How? We didn't have 10,000 years to get comfortable with old designs, Priya said, not unkindly. We had to make everything work as efficiently as possible. Fast. Turns out that forces some interesting engineering choices. The Athena, humanity's second warship, reached partial combat readiness on day 5, exactly as Marcus had ordered, its weapons and shields online, even as engineers continued finishing non-critical systems around the clock. The remaining 4 hulls, the Hera, the Apollo, the Artemis, and the Hermes, pushed toward whatever state of readiness their construction timelines allowed, some with only half their intended weapon loadouts installed, crewed by volunteers who understood exactly what kind of risk they were taking. Elena remained on Threshold Station, coordinating with the Council's combined fleet command, feeding real-time updates on humanity's progress to Marcus, and receiving, in turn, updates on Val Sethi fleet movements from Council sensor arrays. Kael'th Dra worked alongside her, his diplomatic skill smoothing over the countless small frictions that arose as humanity's small fleet was folded, awkwardly and quickly, into the larger Council defense plan. On day 9, sensor data confirmed the Val Sethi fleet had altered course slightly, now projected to strike first at a cluster of independent trade worlds 2 days ahead of Sol System, buying humanity precious extra time before direct engagement. On day 10, the combined Council Defense Fleet, Thren cruisers, Vantori escorts, Chorin swarm ships, and, for the first time in galactic history, 6 human vessels flying under the banner of a species that had been forbidden from building warships less than a year earlier, gathered in staging formation at the edge of the threatened trade cluster. Marcus Reyes stood on the bridge of the Ares, looking out at the assembled fleet on the main display. Dozens of alien warships arranged in careful formation, and at the edge of that formation, 6 gray human hulls that had begun their existence disguised as mining ships. "Position report," he said quietly. "All 6 vessels in formation," Ortiz reported. "Ares and Athena at full combat readiness, Hera and Apollo at approximately 80%, Artemis and Hermes at 60%, weapons online, shields functional, some non-critical systems still incomplete." Marcus nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. 11 months ago, humanity had been told it could not be trusted to build a warship. 10 days ago, that ban had finally been lifted, far too late to matter if not for the fact that humanity had never stopped building in the first place. "Send a message to the Council Fleet Command," he said. "Tell them humanity's fleet is in position and ready to engage." He looked out at the stars one last time, thinking of Elena's words in the council chamber, thinking of Priya's exhausted determination through months of secret construction, thinking of every engineer and volunteer crew member who had chosen to build something the galaxy said couldn't be built. "Val Sethi fleet detected," came the report from the sensor station, sharp and sudden. 40 vessels, emerging from stealth approach, bearing directly for the trade cluster. Time to contact, 6 minutes. Marcus's hands tightened on the armrests of his command chair. "All hands battle stations," he said. "Let's show them what humanity built." In the hours before that final approach, while the combined fleet gathered at the edge of the threatened trade cluster, a different kind of tension gripped the crews of humanity's 6 ships. Aboard the Hera, Captain Diego Alvarez walked the length of his ship's cramped corridors, checking in with crew members at their stations, offering quiet words of encouragement where he could. The Hera was only 80% complete. One of its secondary shield generators was still offline, and 2 of its planned railgun mounts remained unfinished, their spaces marked with hazard tape and temporary bulkheads. It was, by any honest measure, not truly ready for combat, but it was ready enough, and that would have to be sufficient. "Scared?" he asked a young weapons technician named Aiko Tanaka, who sat rigidly at her console, running diagnostic checks for what was probably the 10th time in an hour. "Yes, sir," she admitted. "Is that bad?" "No," Alvarez said. "It means you understand what's about to happen. I'd worry more about anyone who isn't scared right now." He paused, looking around the cramped bridge at his young, mostly inexperienced crew. "But I'll tell you what I told the rest of the crew during muster. We didn't build these ships to run from a fight. We built them because we refused to be helpless. Whatever happens today, remember that. We're not helpless anymore." Aboard the Artemis, held in reserve alongside the Hermes, due to their lower readiness levels, the mood was different. A strange mixture of relief at not being on the front line and frustration at not being able to contribute more directly. Captain Yuki Ishikawa gathered her crew in the ship's cramped mess hall and addressed them plainly. "We're not going to be first into this fight," she said, "but that doesn't mean we're not part of it. If the front line needs support, we'll be ready to move within minutes. If anyone falls back damaged, we'll be ready to cover their retreat. Reserve duty isn't glory duty, but it matters just as much." On the Ares, Marcus made his own final rounds before the engagement, stopping briefly at the small chapel-like meditation room that had been included, almost as an afterthought, in the ship's original mining vessel design. A quiet space, meant for crew rest during long deep space hauls, now serving a very different purpose. He found Ensign Maria Delgado there alone, sitting quietly, her hands folded in her lap. "You should be at your station," he said gently. "I know, sir. I just needed a minute." She looked up at him, her young face tight with nerves she was clearly trying hard to control. "Admiral, can I ask you something? Do you think we're really ready for this? Really?" Marcus considered the question carefully. the same question he had been asking himself in quiet moments for the better part of a year. "I think," he said slowly, "that we built the best ships we knew how to build, with the best people we could find, in less time than anyone should reasonably have. I think we tested what we could test, and prepared as much as circumstances allowed. Whether that's enough, I honestly don't know, Ensign. But I know this. Whatever we're about to face, we're facing it as prepared as we could possibly be, and that has to count for something." Delgado nodded slowly, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. "Thank you, sir. I needed to hear that." "Get to your station," Marcus said, not unkindly. "We're all counting on each other today." She left, and Marcus stood alone in the small, quiet room for a moment longer, gathering himself before the storm that was about to break. The Val Sethi fleet emerged from stealth approach exactly as the sensors had predicted. 40 vessels with strange, organic hulls that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it, moving in a formation too precise, too coordinated, to be anything but a single will directing many bodies. On the bridge of the Ares, Marcus Reyes watched the tactical display fill with red contact markers, and felt his pulse settle into the steady, focused calm he remembered from 30 years of naval service. A calm that had nothing to do with the absence of fear, and everything to do with choosing not to let fear decide anything. "Combined fleet formation holding," Ortiz reported. "Thren cruisers taking the center. Vantori escorts on the flanks. Chorin swarm ships providing point defense screening. We're positioned on the left flank alongside the Athena, Hera, and Apollo. Artemis and Hermes are held in reserve, per Fleet Command's request, given their partial system status." "Understood," Marcus said. "Weapons status? All railguns charged and ready," Quan reported from the weapons station. "Shields at full capacity." "Time to contact?" 90 seconds. Marcus keyed the fleet-wide channel, his voice steady. "This is Admiral Reyes, Humanity's fleet. I know some of you have doubts about ships that didn't exist as warships 11 days ago. I understand that. But I promise you this. We built these ships to survive, and we intend to prove it today. Humanity's fleet is ready. Reyes out." There was a brief pause, then a response crackled through, in the formal cadence of Thren Fleet Command. "Acknowledged, Admiral Reyes. Fleet Commander Threll wishes it known. The Council fleet is grateful for your presence. May your ships perform as well as your engineers claim." "They will," Marcus said quietly, more to himself than to anyone listening. The Val Sethi fleet closed the final distance in silence. There was no hail, no warning, no declaration. Exactly as it had been at Varen's Rest, exactly as it had been with the doomed border fleet 3 weeks earlier. The enemy simply arrived, and then the enemy fired. The first exchange was chaos. Val Sethi weapons, strange pulsing beams of energy unlike anything in Council arsenals, lashed out across the combined fleet's formation. A Vantori escort on the right flank took a direct hit and staggered, its shields flaring bright red before failing entirely. A second hit, reducing it to drifting wreckage within seconds. Thren cruisers returned fire, their beam weapons and missile salvos crashing against the strange, light-absorbing hulls of the enemy ships, with far less effect than expected. The Val Sethi hulls seemed to shrug off nearly a third of incoming damage that should have been lethal. "Railguns, target the lead Val Sethi vessel," Marcus ordered. "Fire at will." The Ares shuddered as its railguns discharged, twin streaks of light crossing the battle space in less than a second. Unlike the Thren beam weapons, the human railgun rounds did not simply strike the enemy hull's strange light-absorbing surface. They punched straight through it, the sheer kinetic force of the impact overwhelming whatever exotic material property made the hulls resistant to energy weapons. The lead Val Sethi vessel came apart in a silent, violent bloom of debris. "Direct hit. Enemy vessel destroyed," Quan called out, disbelief and excitement warring in his voice. On the tactical display, Marcus watched the pattern of the battle begin, almost imperceptibly, to shift. The Athena, the Hera, and the Apollo opened fire in coordinated volleys, their railguns finding target after target among the Val Sethi formation, each impact tearing through hulls that had shrugged off Council beam weapons with contemptuous ease. "They're adjusting," Ortiz warned. "Enemy formation is concentrating fire on our 4 ships. They've identified us as the priority threat." "Then let's give them a reason to regret that," Marcus said. "Evasive pattern Delta. Keep the shields angled toward incoming fire. David, keep those railguns firing. The next several minutes passed in a blur of controlled violence. The Ares took hit after hit, its shields flaring and straining under concentrated enemy fire, dropping from full capacity to 60%, then to 40%. Priya Anand, monitoring engineering systems from a secondary console, called out warnings, in a voice tight with focus but not panic. Shield Generator 2 is running hot, redirecting power from non-essential systems. Do it, Marcus said. Across the battle space, the combined Council fleet began to find its footing, drawing confidence and coordination from the sudden, unexpected effectiveness of humanity's railguns. Thren cruiser commanders adjusted their own targeting solutions, focusing fire alongside the human ships to overwhelm individual Vale Sethi vessels with combined barrages rather than spreading damage thin across the entire enemy formation. Fleet Commander Threll requests coordination, came the message over the comm. Human railgun data being shared across combined fleet targeting systems, requesting the Ares and accompanying vessels lead concentrated strikes on priority targets. Copy that, Marcus said. Ortiz, get me a firing solution on the largest enemy contact. Designate it Val Sethi Actual. If that thing really is coordinating the rest of them, taking it out might break their formation. Solution locked, Ortiz confirmed a moment later. Range, 80,000 kilometers. All ships, concentrate fire on Valal Sethi Actual, Marcus ordered, relaying the target to the rest of the human fleet and, through the shared data, to the combined Council formation. Fire. The Ares, the Athena, the Hera, and the Apollo fired together, 4 streaks of light converging on a single point in space, joined a heartbeat later by Thren missile salvos and Vantori beam weapons, all guided by the targeting data humanity's superior railgun sensors had provided. The largest Val Sethi vessel took the combined barrage directly amidships. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. And then, in a slow, cascading failure, the ship's hull began to crack apart, strange energy discharges arcing across its surface, before it finally, silently, came apart entirely. The effect on the rest of the Val Sethi fleet was immediate and dramatic. Enemy formation is breaking up, Ortiz called out. They're losing coordination. Fleet Commander Threll was right. That ship was directing the others. Without their central coordination, the remaining Val Sethi vessels began fighting with far less precision, their movements growing erratic, uncertain. The combined Council fleet, sensing the shift, pressed the advantage hard. Marcus watched the tactical display as red contact markers began winking out one by one, the enemy formation collapsing under the weight of coordinated fire it could no longer effectively counter. Remaining Val Sethi vessels are retreating, Ortiz reported 18 minutes later, her voice carrying a note of disbelief. They're breaking off and withdrawing toward dead reach. Marcus allowed himself finally to breathe. Let them go, he said. We're not chasing anything into unknown space today. Hold formation. Damage report, all human vessels. The reports came in over the next several minutes. The Apollo had taken serious damage to its port shield generator, but remained combat capable. The Hera had lost 2 railgun mounts to a direct hit, but suffered no casualties. The Athena reported minor hull damage and nothing more. The Ares itself had come through with shields depleted, but hull intact. No casualties among its crew. 6 ships, built in secret, disguised as mining vessels, forbidden from existing less than a year ago, had just helped break the back of an enemy fleet that had destroyed a combined Council border force in 11 minutes, 3 weeks earlier. The message reached Elena Voss on Threshold Station 40 minutes later, relayed through Council Fleet Command with an urgency that told her everything before she even opened it. She read the battle summary standing in the observation lounge, Kael'th Dra beside her, both of them silent as the details unfolded. The Val Sethi retreat, the destruction of their coordinating vessel, the survival of every human ship and crew. They did it, she said quietly, her voice unsteady with relief. Kael'th studied the report over her shoulder, his pale green face showing something she had rarely seen from him in 8 months of careful diplomacy, unguarded astonishment. Your people built 6 warships in under a year, in secret, defying a direct Council ruling, and today those ships broke the coordination of an enemy fleet that nearly destroyed a combined Thren and Vantori force. Ambassador Voss, I do not think the Council fully understands, even now, what it is dealing with. Elena managed a tired, genuine smile. We're not trying to be a threat, Kael'th. We're just trying to survive, the same as everyone else. I know, Kael'th said quietly. I believe that is precisely why it worked. 3 days later, the council chamber convened again, and for the first time since Elena Voss had taken her seat among the 12 delegates, the atmosphere was not one of caution or fear, but something closer to genuine respect. The speaker addressed the chamber, its 4 eyes moving slowly across the assembled delegates before settling on Elena. The Council formally acknowledges humanity's contribution to the defense of the trade cluster, and, by extension, the continued safety of Sol System and neighboring territories, it said. The Council also acknowledges that humanity's construction of warships prior to the lifting of the ban constituted a violation of Council law. It paused. However, in light of the circumstances and the outcome, the Council has voted to formally suspend any punitive action regarding that violation. A murmur ran through the chamber, but no serious objection followed. Even the Chorin Hive delegate, when Elena glanced toward it, offered only a small, resigned tilt of its head. Furthermore, the speaker continued, the Council recognizes that recent events have demonstrated a critical gap between the technological capabilities of certain member species and the threats now facing this galaxy. Effective immediately, the Council requests that humanity share relevant shipbuilding expertise with allied member species, on mutually agreeable terms, to strengthen the defense of Council space as a whole. Elena rose slowly to her feet, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. Not triumph exactly, but something quieter and more lasting. Respect, earned the hard way, through months of secrecy and risk, and the courage of people willing to build something the galaxy said they couldn't. Humanity accepts the Council's request, she said. We built these ships to protect our home, not to threaten anyone else's. We're glad to share what we've learned, if it means fewer places like Varen's Rest in the future. The speaker inclined its head, and for the first time in 8 months, Elena thought she saw something like genuine warmth behind its 4 unblinking eyes. Then let it be recorded, the speaker said, that the species once told it could not be trusted to build a single warship has, within a year, changed the balance of this galaxy's defense, and perhaps, in doing so, changed how this Council understands trust itself. Far above Luna, in high orbit where 6 gray hulls had once floated in careful disguise, Marcus Reyes stood on the observation deck of Shipyard 3, looking out at the Ares and its 5 sister ships, no longer hidden, no longer pretending to be anything other than what they were. Priya Anand stood beside him, exhaustion and quiet pride mingling on her face in equal measure. 7 more hulls are already approved for construction, she said. Fleet Command wants a proper defense force this time, not something we have to hide. Marcus nodded slowly, watching the sunlight catch the Ares' hull, the same hull that had once carried fake registration papers and false blueprints, the same hull that had punched through an enemy that had nearly ended a combined Council fleet. They said we couldn't build it, he said quietly. Priya smiled, tired but genuine. We built it anyway. Somewhere far beyond Karsa Belt, in the dark, uncharted region of space, the old star charts still called Dead Reach, the surviving Valsethi ships retreated into the shadows to lick their wounds and regroup. In the weeks that followed the battle, Sol System changed in ways both small and enormous. The Terran Assembly, once cautious and divided over the revelation of the Prometheus program, now stood firmly behind an expanded and fully public shipbuilding initiative. 7 new hulls were approved within the first month alone, this time built openly, with proper funding, proper staffing, and no need for false paperwork or careful lies to Council inspectors. Sanjay Okoro was promoted to Chief Weapons Engineer for the entire expanded fleet, a position that came with considerably less secrecy and considerably more sleep than his old one. Captain Ortiz remained in command of the Ares, now formally recognized as the flagship of Sol Defense Command's new frontier fleet. Ensign Maria Delgado, who had once sat alone in a quiet meditation room wondering if humanity was truly ready for what was coming, was recommended for early promotion after her calm, steady performance during the battle. a recommendation she accepted with quiet pride. On Threshold Station, Elena Voss found her role within the Council changing as well. Where she had once spent her days fighting to be heard, defending humanity's right to basic trust, she now found herself invited into planning sessions for the galaxy's broader defense strategy, her opinions sought out rather than merely tolerated. It was not a comfortable transition. The sudden weight of expectation sat heavily on her shoulders. But it was, she reflected, a far better problem to have than the one she'd started with. Kael'th Dra remained her closest ally on the Council, and in the months that followed, their working relationship deepened into something like genuine friendship. He visited Earth for the first time 6 months after the battle, touring the shipyards above Luna with open curiosity, meeting Marcus and Priya in person for the first time after months of relayed messages and second-hand reports. "I confess," he told Elena, standing on the observation deck beside her, watching the newest hull take shape in the distance, "I did not expect, when I first met your people, that I would one day consider humanity among the most reliable allies in Council space. You have a gift, Ambassador Voss, for turning desperation into determination and determination into results." Elena smiled, thinking of everything it had taken to reach this moment. The secret meetings, the sleepless nights, the terror of every close call, the courage of ordinary engineers and young crew members who had chosen to build something the galaxy said couldn't be built. "We didn't do it alone," she said. "We had help. We had time, even if it didn't always feel like enough. And we had people willing to take the risk when it mattered most." The Valsethi threat did not disappear entirely. Scouts continued to report occasional activity near Dead Reach in the months that followed. Small probing raids against the very edge of Council territory, testing defenses, searching for weaknesses. But the crushing, unstoppable advance that had once seemed inevitable had been broken, at least for now, and the Council's combined forces, strengthened by humanity's shipbuilding expertise, humbled by the reminder that 10,000 years of tradition did not guarantee readiness for every threat, stood watch along the frontier, with a vigilance that had not existed before Varen's rest. Marcus Reyes visited the memorial built for the outpost's 4,000 victims exactly 1 year after the attack, standing quietly among representatives from a dozen different species who had gathered to honor the dead. He thought about the long road that had led from that tragedy to this moment, the ban, the secrecy, the desperate months of construction, the battle that had finally proven what humanity was capable of when given no other choice. Priya Anand stood beside him, looking out at the memorial's simple, quiet design, a ring of lights, one for each life lost, slowly orbiting a small sculpture representing the outpost that had once stood there. "They said we couldn't build it," Marcus said quietly, echoing words he had spoken once before, in a different context, on a different day. "We built it anyway," Priya finished, just as she had then, and it mattered. They stood together in silence, watching the lights turn slowly against the dark, thinking of everything that had been lost, and everything that had, in the end, been saved. Far beyond Karsa Belt, in the shadows of Dead Reach, something still watched and waited. But for the first time since the crisis began, Sol System, and the Council it had joined less than 2 years earlier, stood ready to meet whatever came next, built not on fear or tradition, but on the simple, stubborn refusal to remain defenseless when the people they loved were counting on them. Humanity had been told it could not build a warship. Humanity had built 6, and then, quietly, patiently, it began building more. The end.